The Bloodline just took things up a notch, so we'll check out everything that's new there. We'll also see what's going on with Roman Reigns, Jey, Paul Heyman, and more. So the last thing we saw from this story was the act of Jimmy heading over to Raw in an attempt to recruit his brother Jey to join the family on their side again. But understandably so, Jey turns down Jimmy right away and doesn't even hear him out. But it looks like throughout the course of the week, Jey did think the whole situation over enough that it made him pay a visit to SmackDown. Jey made a surprise appearance to interrupt Solo's speech. Instead of directly helping and aligning with Roman and Jimmy, Jey's approach of trying to help the situation was to go speak directly to Solo to try and create peace that way. Jey told Solo that what he was doing was only hurting and dividing the family. Jey pointed out to Solo how the tribal chief position is earned, not taken. Jey invited Solo to take Roman out of power if he so pleases, but just not to divide the family in the process of doing that. Solo's counterargument was that he was only trying to unite the family more than ever, not divide them. Solo said he's ready to welcome Roman, Jimmy, and Jey back into the family. Only thing is that they just have to acknowledge him first, and then they'll all be united again. Jey said that if Solo was trying to unite them again, then why did he have to go get all of those new individuals he brought into the bloodline? Jey referenced something that we did hear Paul Heyman mention before, and that's the fact that Roman did have the opportunity to bring in the Tonga brothers and Jacob several years ago, but that Roman turned them down due to them being too out of control and just pure evil. And now we hear Jey echo that same thing here in his promo with Solo. Jey didn't back down from Jacob either, telling him to watch the way he was staring at him before he had to knock him out. Jey pointed out how this was just a kind word of advice to his younger brother Solo, but that things will be different the next time they see each other. And no one knows what that really means or when even will be the next time they'll see each other because they're obviously on different brands. But it's sounding like this was Jey's attempt to talk some sense into his little brother, and the next time they come across each other, there'll be no talking, just physical action. That sounds exactly like what Jey was getting at there. So it definitely leaves the book open for another meeting between Solo and Jey in the near future. Especially with how Jey spoke to Jacob as well. Things aren't finished there at all by any means. But then that's when we got a pretty big backstage segment. As Roman and Jimmy are arriving to the show, Jey is just leaving the building. Jimmy smiles and tried to dab up Jey, but Jey doesn't extend his hand and keeps walking away. But Roman grabs Jey's arm and tells him that he's proud of him and that they're all proud of him, but Jey still walks away. This is a bit of a full circle moment for Roman and Jey. Go back to Roman and Jey's backstage conversations with each other from 3 years ago, and it was all about Roman wanting the best for Jey to break out, and for fans to know who Jey is, instead of just people getting him and his brother confused for each other. And several years later, Jey did exactly that. Broke out into superstardom, made a name for himself, became intercontinental champion, and everyone knows who he is now. So that's what the Proud Line was all about there from Roman. It was a big callback to all of their conversations from the pandemic days of SmackDown. It was a big moment as well because it was the first time the original Bloodline 3 were back together on screen in a somewhat friendly manner in a very long time. It looks like those words from Roman to Jey was his attempt at breaking the ice between the two, but when Jey just walks away, Roman tells Jimmy that he told him. Most likely referring to the fact that Roman told Jimmy that recruiting Jey wouldn't work. So we then see Roman and Jimmy sitting backstage in their locker room, and that segment kicks off with a comedic moment that also serves as being a teaser for Paul Heyman's return. Roman is seen thinking about the entire situation. The camera zooms out to show Jimmy standing over Roman's shoulder, and he actually scares Roman. Jimmy said he was standing in the WISEMAN spot to try and relax Roman, but Roman points out that Jimmy isn't the WISEMAN. Jimmy says that he still feels like they should talk to Jey again, and that's when Roman drops a pretty big line that went under the radar for a lot of fans. Roman said that he feels like if the WISEMAN was here, this would all be done by now. So which could be referring to the idea that Roman believes if Heyman was around, he would have had Jey back reunited with Roman and Jimmy by now. So that quick line from Roman could have been a big teaser, or like Paul Heyman would say, a big spoiler for his return. Roman just set the foundation and rolled down that Paul Heyman could play for his return. Paul Heyman's main goal and purpose could be to go talk to Jey and get him to come back and fight alongside Roman and Jimmy. Roman and Jimmy may be great physically in the ring, but they don't have the talking skills that Paul Heyman has, so that's why Roman and Jimmy did a terrible job of trying to get Jey to hear them out with their words. Heyman may not be of much use physically in the ring, but his specialty is wise thinking and talking. If anyone is going to convince Jey to come back, it's not going to be Roman and Jimmy. It's going to be Paul Heyman. So that's what looks like was being set up there. It'll ultimately be Paul Heyman's job to get the original three members back together and united on SmackDown. So you got to assume that Paul Heyman's return isn't that far out either. But Roman comes up with a new plan, and that's just to acknowledge Solo and have that be the way that everything gets fixed. Roman tells Solo to his face that he doesn't really think the family is better off right now than they previously were. Roman said he has visions of all of them still carrying gold and having big paydays like the old times, and how he wants peace. So Roman also mentioned a big thing that really explains his actions. Roman revealed that prior to his father's passing, he promised his father that he would fix matters with Solo and the family. So Roman is trying to do good things. He's trying to stay peaceful. He's trying to live up to the last word he gave his father, but obviously Solo is making that very difficult for him. So Roman literally acknowledged Solo within this segment, but Solo kept pushing for more and more from Roman until Roman eventually broke and yelled back at him. Solo points out how Roman hasn't changed and how that same old attitude and persona is still in there. Solo brings out his members who are carrying a beaten down Jimmy. And another 4-on-1 beatdown unfolds with Roman just standing no chance against so many numbers. For the second week in a row, Solo's bloodline just mops the floor with Jimmy and Roman, and that's where the show ends. So what's next for this story? Well, all signs still seem to indicate that the October 21st match between Jey and Braun will be where the bloodline story progresses next at. Jey did just technically stick his head into the bloodline's business on the October 18th edition of SmackDown. On that show, Jey did rudely interrupt Solo, refused to acknowledge Solo, rubbed his intercontinental title in their faces, and threatened Jacob and Solo to top everything off. So Jey may have not put hands on the new bloodline, but he did a handful of things there that may put him on the opposition side of their book. So it seems highly likely that Solo sends the gang over to Raw to send another message to Jey by getting involved in the intercontinental title match, and potentially even costing Jey the intercontinental title. Maybe that's Solo's way of basically telling Jey to stay in his lane on Raw and not to worry about what's happening on SmackDown. But of course, instead of scaring Jey off, that act of costing him the intercontinental title may actually end up backfiring and giving Jey even more motivation and reasoning to side with Roman and Jimmy. It's something we've been saying for weeks now, but it really seems like the key for Jey returning to the original bloodline is the intercontinental title. They put so much emphasis on how it's been 14 years in the making for Jey to win it, how important it means to him. So if Solo comes around and costs him the title just to send a message, we're to assume that Jey would then want to come after Solo with everything he got for ripping that title away from him after he worked endlessly to get it. It really seems like that's the kind of scenario they've been setting up from the start, so we'll see if the October 21st edition of Raw includes a big moment that takes Jey down that rabbit hole, which also leads to the reunion and return of the bloodline. But what are your thoughts on today's stories? Leave your comments below, don't forget to subscribe with all notifications on, and leave a like if you enjoyed. Thanks for watching.